this webinar that it's organized by the North America Research Center, el Centro de Investigaciones sobre América del Norte, CISAN, of the National Autonomous University, and it's in collaboration with the Quantum Algorithms Institute in Canada. So I'm very glad to stay here with two excellent panelists, Timothy King, Louise Turner. They are experts related of the topic of issues of quantum technologies. So they will present a very interesting presentation today related about the development of the quantum policy of the government of Canada. After that, they'll talk us about related some issues of the quantum advantage in the cybersecurity in this third decade of the 21st century. So I'm very glad. I want to share with us that I met Timothy at LOUISE of the Global Conference on Cyber Capacity Building, organized the last year in Ghana, in Accra, in the city of Accra. And we are very interesting because this topic are see right now very close from the development of Latin American countries, but it's very important that we start to know about the quantum technology, about the development of these very interesting emerging technologies. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Tim. It's a pleasure to have you, Luis. Thank you for your time. And it will be an awesome webinar. So you can start when you want. Oh, Tim, you have mute your microphone.
There we go. Now I've got the mic on. Here we go. I'm going to go to screen one. Moving things around. I have too many screens. Louise, I'll do the intro this time since I'm running it. Okay. So welcome. Louise and I work with the Quantum Algorithms Institute, which is based in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada. Louise is in BC right now, and I'm in Ontario, which is in eastern Canada. So we're coming from two sides of North America to you here. We are, as Juan said, we initially did this presentation after doing some research into how quantum is going to influence cybersecurity in the coming years. If you're interested in seeing the original research paper, the link at the top right there, the QR code, will take you straight to the research paper. Our goal here today is not to baffle you with complicated quantum concepts. I'm a cybersecurity educator, and my goal is always to take all of the jargon out of things and try and make it as simple as I can. And Louise is a big fan of this approach too. So there we go. Now we're cooking. So I'll introduce myself, and then I'll leave it to Louise to introduce herself. My name is Tim King. I'm an educator. I teach high school. I have for the last long time, about 20 years. But in the process of doing that, I worked in IT before and while I was a teacher. So I've tried to bring modern technology to my students as much as I could. In 2017, we got involved in CyberTitan, which is our national student cybersecurity competition in Canada. And we then proceeded with a string of 7 national finalists. Louise was on my first ever all-female team to go to nationals, and then became the team captain and is now doing all sorts of interesting things. Take it away, Louise.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Louise Turner. I am going to my 4th year of my cybersecurity undergraduate degree at Queen's University, which is in Ontario, Canada. So quite eastern Canada there. And as Tim said, when I was in high school, I did the CyberTitan competition, so Canada's national cybersecurity competition, and my work in CyberTitan and throughout school led me to earn a Schulich Leader Scholarship, which is the biggest STEM scholarship in Canada, to go to Queen's University. And now I work at the Quantum Algorithms Institute as a cybersecurity research intern. So I do lots of quantum research, cybersecurity research, and how they mesh together.
I'm tempted to take the word intern right out of there and just go with like full commitment, cybersecurity researcher.
Cybersecurity researcher.
Exactly. So Juan mentioned we met at the Global Forum for Cybersecurity Excellence's first international conference. We had a great chat about anime and the taxi on the way back to the airport, and we've stayed in touch ever since. So again, our goal here today is to not baffle you with anything. If you want more details about what QAI is all about, there's our link. There will be a link at the end of this presentation that takes you back to this presentation so you can follow through. So if something happens too quickly, don't panic. At the end, you can just use the QR code and go back to the presentation. QAI is funded by the British Columbia government. BC has been fortunate in it was one of the first starting places of quantum computing in Canada. D-Wave is a company that started quantum computing long before most people had heard of it. So the quantum ecosystem in BC is exceptionally well developed. Why present on quantum technology if we're talking about cybersecurity? This is from this is the director of research for the NSA. And the problem with quantum computing, especially in the era of AI, is that you don't know when things are going to break. Things could suddenly change very quickly. And we could go from where we are right now with noisy intermediate stage quantum computing to a breakthrough. And it could happen quite quickly. The people I've been talking to in quantum suggest maybe 4 to 5 years. And then more recently, they're saying that's actually quite conservative. It could be 3 years. If we have an efficient quantum computer in 3 years, this is going to cause all sorts of cybersecurity headaches, which is what we're going to explain to you today. Here's the Canadian government's angle on this. Canada has a quantum strategy. We've been pursuing it quite aggressively. And I think this quote is really telling because the AI spring has happened and everyone's very conscious of AI right now. But quantum is like AI. And what Minister Champagne here is saying is it's not vertical. It doesn't live in its own silo. It's horizontal, so it will influence all other technology. So, and you've seen it with AI now. What's happening is you're seeing AI in manufacturing and logistics. You're seeing it in creativity. It influences everything. And so it's not something that lives in its own silo. It spreads out and affects everything. Quantum will be the same way. When we break through this current stage of quantum development, and I should emphasize the science and the theory is very well thought out at this point. It's our technology that needs to catch up. So just like when we were moving into the nuclear age, we'd understood how to create nuclear devices, but we hadn't worked out the technology yet. We're at that stage with quantum right now. We understand the science and we're ready to advance. We just need the technology. And when it hits, it's going to change everything. So a good way to describe this, Shohini Ghosh is is sort of she's one of the top STEM researchers in Canada, and she put me onto this concept of quantum 1.0 and quantum 2.0. So if you think quantum is this future thing that isn't here yet, actually quantum technology has been here for a long time. If you've ever had an MRI scan, as you're seeing here, that uses quantum mechanics. You couldn't do it without it. On the right, if you know anything about lasers, that's a GIF of a laser with spontaneous emissions. And that, again, is a quantum phenomenon. So quantum is all around us. Naturally occurring quantum is what we spent the 20th century learning how to harness. Perhaps the biggest one from a cybersecurity and ICT point of view is transistors. You couldn't get transistors working the way they do without quantum effects. So transistors are quantum technology, but they depend on naturally occurring quantum tech. So the tech just uses something that's already there. The diagram here is interesting in that we've reached a limit with Moore's law in terms of how small we can make transistors. So people are worried about running out of processing speed. We're not going to keep increasing the way we have. And what's interesting now is up until now, we've been approaching this from a quantum 1.0 point of view. But if we actually start engineering quantum outcomes, we could actually make even smaller transistors that are much, much faster, quantum transistors. So any pictures you see here, you'll see a link on the page. If you follow to the presentation, you can go look up the link directly. So we tried to source everything as much as we can. So this is the quantum 2.0 piece. I went where you should always go when you're looking for information on the internet, the Australian Army. The Australian Army does a really good job of describing how quantum 2.0 works. So the key difference here is we're not using naturally occurring quantum phenomenon anymore. We're actually engineering quantum outcomes. So this is a big difference. What we used to do was just depend on MRIs using naturally occurring quantum. But in this case, we're actually starting to make nanotechnology that can engineer atoms and photons and things like that to produce outcomes that we want. So we're engineering at a very small level here. And that's what quantum 2.0 is. And we're in the middle of the dawn of that age of expansion. Quantum computers are different. I want to say they're weird. So if you want to think of it that way, when you think about a computer, such as the one in front of me or the one anyone is using, they're all electronic. So you've got the same silicon base, you've got the same traces in the wiring, the circuits all work on a similar foundation. Quantum computers do not work like this. For a quantum computer, you could use a variety of different materials. And what you're trying to do is isolate that material from the noise of reality. And then you can use it using small amounts of magnetism and energy to start using it like a calculator. And what's interesting about a quantum computer is when it gives you a calculation, in a classic computer, you code the bits. The bits are absolutely 1 or 0. There's no guessing. And it gives you an answer. So if you coded a binary 2 and a binary 2 and you added them together and it gave you a binary 4, that's all very Newtonian. It makes sense in a very logical way. But what a quantum computer does is it uses probability to calculate outcomes. And because it uses probability, the way it processes information is completely different from a classical computer. Both are doing computation, but in very different ways. So I mentioned that they were different. A quantum computer may not even use the same materials. Some quantum computers can use trapped ions, so they use a magnetic field to trap a charged particle and then apply electricity to that to spin the ion in a certain way. And using that, you can use it to actually make calculations. You can use defects in solids. So if you have a big diamond lattice with a defect inside it, that space inside the lattice gives you room to isolate an atom and do some calculation. You've also got semiconductor quantum dots. You've got quantum conducting generally, topological nanowires. There are a million different ways to build a quantum computer, and we haven't settled on the best one yet. So when you think about how different quantum computers are, you could have a quantum computer that uses light. It's using photons. Or you could have a quantum computer that's using an atom, a spin on an atom. So very, very fascinating technology. And now Louise is up.
Yeah, so since we've talked about what quantum computers are, kind of the evolution of quantum computers, now we got to get into the cybersecurity piece of this. So why are we really talking about this? What are the implications of a quantum computer for cybersecurity? So to kind of set the stage on this, we need to understand RSA encryption. So RSA encryption is an incredibly popular encryption method that we have used for decades, and it's used on essentially everything you do on the internet. So as it says in the quote there, over 90% of internet connections begin with RSA as part of the SSL handshake. So that is pretty much everything you do on the internet begins with RSA. So applications currently using RSA are HTTPS. So you're watching this on YouTube, that's an HTTPS website. SSH, TLS, so the transport layer security. So the transport layer of networking, all the security that goes on into that, and many VPNs. So RSA encryption has been thought near impossible to crack for many, many years because classical computers simply just are not powerful enough to crack it. And we'll get into why in the next slide. Yeah, so how does RSA work? Why is it so hard to break? And why may it soon not work? So in a very simplified nutshell, some people who really know how RSA works are going to look at this and say, oh, it's so much more complicated than that. But just so you can understand it, RSA essentially functions on the basis of prime factorization. So you multiply two prime numbers together, get a number, and then if you want to decrypt whatever someone has sent you, you essentially need to find those two prime numbers with their product. So we have an example here with the number 72, and you just go backwards, kind of reverse engineer the number to find what prime numbers make up that number 72. You can see here there's not many steps in factoring 72, not many steps at all. It's not that bad, just about 4 steps. But with a RSA key, so the one that we use, it is a number that is 613 decimal digits long. So that is almost incomprehensibly large. So try finding 2 prime numbers that make up a number like that. And that is why RSA has been thought to be so secure for so long, because a classical computer, so an electronic one, the one that you and I are using today, would take over 300 trillion years to crack one of these RSA keys. But with quantum computers, that can happen in a matter of days if we find a quantum computer that is powerful enough. So we can go to the next slide. Perfect. Yes, so quantum algorithms. So why can quantum computers do this so fast? We've talked about what they're made of, but why does it actually work so fast? And essentially to understand this, we need to think back to regular computers, how they work. So the regular computers that we're using function on ones and zeros, so binary ones and zeros that are made using tiny, minuscule electronic circuits within your computer. Now those can either be 1 or 0, and they function one at a time. So it's going to do one calculation, then another calculation, then another calculation in order to get your answer. And that happens in essentially like microseconds, but it's still not fast enough to factor something that large. Now, as we see here in this lovely animation here, the quantum maze, you can see on the left side of your screen, the A maze. That is how a regular computer would go about figuring out how to get to the end of a maze. It sends one little thing through and it tries every possible path one at a time. And then on the right side here, you can see it tries every single path at the exact same time. And that is why it is so much faster. Instead of doing calculations one by one, it does it all at the same time. And we don't have a quantum computer yet that can crack RSA, but as the years go on, we are getting dangerously close to having something that would work. So where is the line for what is safe? Now, RSA is used in so much of our regular cryptography today, but does that mean that all encryption is in danger of quantum computing? Where is the line? What is safe? What isn't safe? So we can see here that some encryption algorithms prone to be broken are things like RSA, elliptical curve cryptography. There are some that are safer now, such as SHA-256, and there are some quantum-resistant encryption algorithms, which we'll go over in the next slide in a moment. But you might be thinking, okay, if we have some that are safe and some that are already quantum-resistant, then why don't we just stop using RSA and transfer over? And that is because it takes so long for us to transfer over cryptography systems. Cryptography, they says in the quote here that these organizations should start worrying quickly if you have data that's significant in 20 years that's encrypted with RSA, because it takes such a long time for us to switch over our encryption methods. It took over 20 years for us to get RSA in the way that we have it now. So we should start working now rather than later.
So now things are going to get even weirder, believe it or not. In the winter, I took a course at MIT on quantum computing, and Peter Shor actually did the tutorials. So Peter Shor invented Shor's algorithm in the mid-90s. And the idea behind Shor's algorithm is you can use quantum advantage to calculate those prime numbers that Louise was talking about with RSA. So what I wanted to do here was try and break down how Shor's algorithm actually works, because for a lot of people, this is a black box thing. They don't understand it. It starts with Fourier transformation. So a Fourier transform takes sound waves and through some rather pretty math, bends the sound wave around a central point, as you can see in the animation there. And then what it does is it looks at the amplitudes and it lets you see where different sound waves are lining up. And even though you have a complicated sound wave here with multiple sounds in it, the Fourier transform lets you visualize that and pick them apart So if anyone here is listening on smart headphones that can not block out sound, it's actually using the Fourier transform to do that. It's highlighting the sound of a lawnmower or something like that and removing it using this process. So Fourier transforms are one thing. If you want to go have a look again at the end, you'll get a link to the presentation. If you bounce over to this YouTube video, it's a great graphical breakdown of how Fourier transforms work. So what they found early on as they were starting to formalize quantum computing is that you can do a quantum Fourier transform. And this is particularly helpful with quantum computers because they depend on probability, and probability tends to come out like a wave, a lot like a Fourier wave, and if you're dealing with sound. So what they thought was, well, if we can use QFTs, create a quantum Fourier transform, we could take data and then look for patterns in the data, and this lets you use quantum advantage to break that pattern out and make use of it. So what you end up with is a quantum computer using this massively parallel processing approach that is able to naturally, because of the way it works, develop these understandings and see patterns in the data. The qubits here at the bottom are helpful because this is generally how people show a qubit graphically. Usually on a normal bit, you would have a 0 and a 1. And it's either or. You can't have both or anything else. On a qubit, if you want a 0, you charge it so that in the block sphere, which is what these are called, the arrow is pointing straight up. So that's a 0 on a qubit. So you can still do 0s and 1s on qubits. And vice versa, if you want a 1, you just have you charge it in such a way that it's basically a negative energy state. But what you do here is if you balance that and you put it into a state of superposition, which these ones are showing, it's around the equator of the block sphere. When you can balance a qubit in that state, it's in all states at the same time. And like Louise showed with your quantum maze there, rather than you having to linearly go through and solve every problem one at a time, like a classic computer would, a quantum computer does them all at once from the state of superposition. So it allows the quantum computer to calculate very quickly. So with a quantum Fourier transform using Shor's algorithm, here's what Peter Shaw realized. Whenever you're working out your prime numbers, you end up with remainders. And those remainders, if you notice, as you're working through them, start to create a pattern. That's a wave that you can exploit in a quantum Fourier transform. Once you understand what that pattern is and you've broken down the operation, the modulo operation, you can understand, you can basically break RSA encryption. So rather than just kind of black box this and say, Shor's algorithm's coming, you should panic. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of a look inside and then so you understand how it works. The step wasn't a giant step, but in recognizing this, it's immediately put things in peril because like Louise said, something like 90% of internet traffic depends on RSA to kick things off. So yeah, good.
Now that we've seen how Shor's algorithm can break RSA encryption, what can we do to defend against this? So quantum secure encryption is still a little bit uncertain. It's a work in progress, but the progress has started hyping up in the past few years. They're trying to get some quantum secure encryption algorithms that we can switch to. So hopeful contenders for the basis of some quantum secure encryption algorithms are lattice-based encryption, multivariate encryption, and hash-based. Now, the one I want to talk about most today is lattice-based encryption because that seems to be the fan favorite. Now, there's a little graphic on the left, the top left there, of some vectors in space. So you see those green and that's not green, that's blue. Blue and red, I combined the colors there. The blue and red arrows there are some vectors in space, and how lattice-based encryption essentially works is it's a bit similar to RSA encryption in a way that it is finding combinations of numbers to get yourself up to a point, but instead of using just numbers, it's actually using geometry in this sense. So how it essentially works is you have two vectors of different length and different angle. So you can see we have a couple vectors there of different length and different angle, and you combine them. So you add one vector onto another, onto another, onto another to get to a point in space. And to break that encryption, you have to find how you combined those vectors to get to that point in space. Now, you probably did quite a bit of this in high school, if you learned about vectors in high school, of combining those vectors and then figuring out, like kind of reverse engineering them to figure out how you combined them. And you can do it pretty easily by hand with a small space like the one you see here. But the way that lattice-based encryption works is it uses a ridiculously large combination of vectors in a ridiculously amount of dimensions. Like, it's not just 2D, it's not 3D, it's like 400 dimensions, something like that. So you have all these points in space, not just on a flat plane, but in space, and you have to use your vectors to get to that point. So then we can see on the next slide.
I was just going to jump in there and add that complexity is one of those things quantum computers tends to be better at, but in this case it's so complicated that the quantum computer kind of chokes on it. So
yeah, so with those lattice-based cryptography algorithms, quantum secure encryption, NIST has actually released some quantum-ready encryption algorithms. So in 2016, NIST started their quantum cryptography project, where they essentially asked everybody, please, can you make some quantum secure encryption algorithms, and we can put them through a bunch of tests, see if we can standardize something. So out of 69 candidates, 4 were chosen for standardization. And just now, a couple weeks ago, NIST has stated that they're going to try and put these quantum secure encryption algorithms into standardization by this summer. So within the next couple months, next couple weeks, we should start seeing some of these encryption algorithms actually become standardized. Now, out of those 4 encryption algorithms that were chosen for standardization, 3 out of those 4 algorithms are lattice-based cryptography. So you can see just how popular lattice-based cryptography is. So we have something, we're good to go. Why should we still be worrying? See on the next slide. Well, yeah, big thing is IoT devices and just migration in general. So IoT devices, IoT stands for Internet of Things, is essentially all these smart devices that you might have around your home. So I have a wireless mouse here. If somebody has you have smart watches, smart thermostats, anything like that's connected to the internet or using some kind of wireless transmission system there, these are all very susceptible to quantum attacks because their hardware just isn't good enough to hold these quantum secure encryption algorithms. So like your smartwatch is not going to be powerful enough to have some of these quantum secure encryption algorithms. So although these are being put into standardization, it's going to take a long time for us to start putting them into all of our systems, and we still have some systems that won't be able to run them at all.
some more doom and gloom for you here. One of the worries is people say, well, quantum computer could be 10 years out, so why worry now? And the concept of harvest now, decrypt later came up. And the idea here is if you want to just draw encrypted information off the internet, this isn't very difficult. And it would be very difficult to follow. I've actually made it a job of trying to understand if this is happening or not. And the problem is it would be very difficult to verify. Short of somebody building a whole bunch of new data centers to store all of a massive amount of data, or perhaps you could look at logs in a network, and if you see an abnormal amount of traffic without anything else happening, that could be it too. But I'm having trouble proving this is happening, but there's no reason why it couldn't be. The logic here would be it would be targeted towards military or financial targets. So if you're, I don't know, the New York Stock Exchange, and you're worried about your internal communications, at this point, if RSA is what's encrypting all of the handshakes for your communications, somebody could just hoover up all that data, collect it all, and then they could sit on it and just store it. They couldn't read it because it's encrypted. But then eventually somebody comes along with a quantum computer, they take your data that may be 5 years old now out, and decrypt it all. If you think about your organization, do you have any data right now that you wouldn't want people to see in the next 5-10 years? Probably. So this is one of those situations where even if we don't have a working quantum computer right now, people are already starting to put things in place so that they'll have a big treasure trove of data. And again, this would be a targeted thing. So generally governments, military, financial institutions, things like this, should be moving to a quantum resistant stance much more quickly. I've clicked off the screen again. So here's a message from the Bank of Canada's CISO. And he said, basically, we all need to start doing this immediately. As Louise mentioned earlier, the time it takes to update this technology, it's not an overnight thing. It's not something you can do in a month. When we presented this in Halifax in Eastern Canada in April, one of the people observing the presentation said they were unable to install this on their routers because the routers didn't have enough memory to run the quantum resistant material. Louise mentioned this elsewhere as well with IoT devices. The firmware in them do not have a lot of space. So if you want a big complicated algorithm that they don't have the means to save it or use it, just the technology is behind. So this isn't just a software update. This is a software and a hardware update that would need to become end-to-end across all systems. So now you consider as well anybody using old technology. I noticed Microsoft told me Windows 10 is being taken out of service, I think in 2025. And you know by 2020 or by 2030, there'll still be a lot of people using it. If it hasn't been updated in 5 years, oh, the headaches. And none of those will be quantum ready. So again, the idea of being able to leverage this technology, we've got the concepts now, and NIST is working to a standard. They also, Louise mentioned there, the IoT devices, there is a NIST standard just for small devices. So they've even diversified their approach. But this is complicated. This is not an easy fix. So a way to approach this is to consider cryptographic hygiene. One of the things we tend to do is RSA and forget. We'll put RSA into service, say, yeah, it's never going to be broken. It takes 3 trillion years for somebody to hack it. We're good. And then not think about it anymore. So our ability to update and modify our cryptographic standards has atrophied. We're in a state now where we're used to just running a standard and we're not used to modifying and changing. So this is pushing against that. So you've got that. You also want the idea of agility in here. So even if you do set a cryptographic standard, and when Louise and I presented this last year in Africa, one of the NIST standards we were about to present on, I think 2 weeks before we presented, the NIST standard had failed and it had gotten hacked by an AI running on an Intel i5 computer, just one computer. So these standards are being challenged right now, as they should be. And the survivors have moved forward, but things change quite quickly in this space, so we need to become more agile with our cryptography. So here's the other angle. You're seeing a lot of marketing spin with this. Google came out with Chrome and said that, you know, we've got quantum encryption keys on all of Chrome from now on. But again, as somebody in Halifax mentioned, if it's not end-to-end, that means at any point in the transmission of the signal, if it drops out of quantum, what most cryptography standards do is they look for the next best standard. So they will drop back down to RSA or whatever else they've got in their arsenal just to keep the message going. Messages don't stop when they run out of encryption. They just go to worse encryption. So when you hear something like this from Chrome saying that, you know, that's it, use Chrome and you're quantum proof, that's more marketing than it is. We need to go end to end with this. And as we've said, that's a lot of work. Apple did it with iMessage, with PQ3. All of these are based on NIST standards, by the way, so we've shown you what's under the hood here. The NIST standards are what are driving all of these sort of announcements, but the thing itself is still, it's basically a marketing swing at the moment, which isn't helpful either. because people think they're safe when they're not. I should mention here that there's much more to the Y2Q or crypto apocalypse or whatever you want to call it than panicking about RSA encryption. And I also want to make a point of clarifying some details. Quantum resistant mathematical encryption, which is what Louise just walked you through with RSA and the NIST standards, is one approach to this. But there's also a lot of work going on in quantum encryption, which is a completely different thing. So here we've got quantum cryptography. So the idea of quantum key distribution is you entangle two photons, or you entangle two quantum objects, and then using that entanglement, you've basically created a locked communication channel. Anybody who tries to interrupt that channel, it stops, it ends the communication. Which again, from, you know, if you're working in a lab and you're thinking, wow, I've made something that's hack proof. The first thing a cybersecurity practitioner told us was, so all I've got to do to denial of service is listen. And I said, yeah, it's like the easiest denial of service attack you'd ever have to do. All you got to do is listen, and it shuts their whole thing down. So this is not a resilient solution yet, but there's a lot of developments going on here. If quantum key distribution comes to be, this would essentially be a completely quantum secure process. So QKD is something to keep in mind, but this is not a mathematical thing. This is a completely different approach to encryption, and it requires things like its own channel. If you use a repeater like we do with data signals and optical channels, it destroys all the quantum information. So you can't use that. I think Louise has an example of somebody doing it in Europe. That comes up later, right?
Yeah, so talking about quantum key distribution, an unhackable quantum internet, and also space. So quantum key distribution has been done or has been shown to work mostly on the ground using fiber cable, like fiber optic cable, but only from pretty short distances, and it's not too reliable yet. Just recently, there was a pretty big breakthrough in Copenhagen where they made a QKD connection from, I mistakenly said it was 80 kilometers last time. It was only like 18, so even less on fiber. But there's a lot of work being done on QKD, and a lot of that work is being done in space. So back in 2016, we actually talked about this last year in our presentation in Ghana, but now we've also updated it because a lot more has happened in terms of quantum space satellites. So in 2016, China launched some 3 or 5 small satellites into space to focus on QKD, and just this month, or now last month in May, China and Russia successfully established a quantum communication channel over a distance of 3,800 kilometers, so a very, very long distance. And it shows a technical feasibility of a quantum communication network, or even a very small quantum internet. So when we talk about a quantum internet, that is it would be a very specified, small kind of connection zone. It wouldn't replace the regular internet, but it would be a very secure connection zone for maybe different companies or military organizations or different countries communicating with each other. So Russia and China just recently showed that this was feasible, and Canada is also planning to launch a satellite into space, a quantum key distribution satellite that is hoping to happen in 2025, so that they can also get the jump on having some quantum secure communication. So we can see that this is evolving pretty quickly. We're reaching that exponential curve. So quantum has kind of been on this very, very, very shallow curve for a long time. But since we presented this presentation first last year, every week it seems like a new breakthrough is occurring. So if we weren't worried or even excited last year, now it's getting even more crazy with how fast things have been evolving, because we have to change this every time we present it because new things keep happening.
I'll just jump in here and try and get some of the sci-fi out of the way. I put this slide in because I knew Juan would like it. So what we were hoping to do is kind of take the marvel out of quantum. So one of the running jokes is anytime they want to refer to something magical in a Marvel movie, they just use the word quantum. And so I hope what we've done here is shown you that this isn't some make-believe sci-fi thing. It's actually happening in the world. When they refer to quantum teleportation, it's the term they use to describe that entangled connection between two particles. So say you're using the quantum key distribution and you've separated your particles by 3,000 kilometers in Louise's example there, then you've created an absolutely secure channel. It cannot be interrupted. If you interrupt it, you change the quantum signature of it and people know that they're being listened to. So when they say teleportation, you immediately go off into this thinking, wow, this is, like Iron Man or something, and it isn't. When they say teleportation, they're talking about that entangled information. So when you're talking about how much goes into quantum development, I was watching a documentary on NASA, and one of the people who worked on the Apollo moon program said if you put enough money in, you can put people on the moon with 1960s technology, which never should have happened. But it was only because they just poured money into it. So in that way, if you look at quantum, and this is out of date, Louise can give you a touch up on this one too. Like she said, every time we go to do this, we have to review all of our data and change everything again because it's moved on. Right now, it says, for instance, Canada is there for 1.6 billion in development, and there's updates there. That's not true anymore. It's significantly more. The one of interest here, though, is if you look over at China, that's 25 billion with a B that they put into quantum development. So when they're doing satellite systems and all of this other, they're not just looking at quantum computing. They're applying this quantum 2.0 quantum engineering technology to a whole field of different things. So you're not just doing quantum computing here. There's a lot more to it than that. But you can see here that this is 55 billion in funding in 2023. And from what we've seen, and we can give you some more data, it's only gone up since then. So in 2023, 55 billion in funding has gone into this.
Yeah, so if you noticed on the last slide there, it said that Australia had funding of just under 100 million Australian dollars. Well, change that immediately. So that was the funding last year, but now just this year, just in the end of April, PsiQuantum, which is a quantum company, received 940 million Australian dollars from the Australian government, which now puts its total funding to about $1.3 billion US dollars, not even Australian dollars, US dollars. And PsiQuantum, what the Australian government is essentially pouring all this money into is they want PsiQuantum to develop the world's first commercially viable quantum computer in Australia. So PsiQuantum is a like Silicon Valley company, but Australia is throwing all this money into it, almost $1 billion Australian dollars, so that they can make something happen. So that's just showing how much money goes into this, how much money is going into it from month to month. It rises by the millions month to month. So it's getting pretty crazy up in there.
And it squeezes the timelines. I think they're asking by 2028 that they have this viable and working. And they're taking that approach where if we fund it significantly, we'll see breakthroughs. So, and if this happens, of course, you're going to start to see some countries with quantum and some countries without. And if you're lacking a quantum computer, of course, there are cybersecurity implications to that, but there are also other implications. One of the benefits of a quantum computer that works at this level would be that it could analyze the DNA from your cancer tumor and your DNA and design a protein that stops your cancer. So because it could do the calculations and work out all of that complex geometry in a matter of hours instead of years. So when you think about that quantum divide, which is something that our CEO at QAI is becoming more and more conscious about, that quantum divide could really define, the world politics in the next 20
Funnily enough, I just read a book recently where engineering drugs, like for individual problems and individual people, was the main divide of the globe. And that's because it was all these different pharmaceutical companies having the best engineering for these drugs. And it's fascinating seeing how that could be a thing. And that was a sci-fi book. So yeah, and things could move even faster. So we've seen the absolute explosion of AI within the past few years, and that exponential curve just kind of leveling out and then exploding, which quantum will likely do relatively soon. But quantum and AI actually work very well together. So AI machine learning can fast track quantum error correction. So one of the biggest issues we have right now with quantum computing is that probability aspect of it. It doesn't give you the answer to something, it gives you what could be the best answer to the thing. And machine learning is very good at stuff like that, at learning and making different algorithms to solve all these errors. So AI can fast track quantum in that sense, but quantum can also fast track AI optimization. So what AI isn't very good at is being optimal, and it uses so many CO2 emissions. So the creation of ChatGPT-3 took $12 million to train and produced the equivalent of 500 tons of CO2 emissions. So if we get a quantum computer to help out AI to be more efficient, making AI even crazier than it already is, not only will it be better than for the environment, but also AI can in turn make quantum computing even faster. So that kind of hybrid approach is actually what we're seeing with quantum a lot at the moment. It's either quantum and hybrid with AI or quantum and hybrid with classical computing. So what we've kind of discovered is quantum computers don't work very well by themselves because they're so specialized. They're really good at doing one or two things. But if you combine a quantum computer with what we already have, then who knows what could happen.
It's the hybrid ones you need to watch out for. Yep. So this is just wrapping up here, but something to leave you with. The idea that SpaceX has changed the way we do space flight. I heard recently something like 90% of things leaving the Earth now are done through private companies. And what you're seeing with quantum is something similar. It's been working in research labs. A lot of the money has gone into the funding for the university and colleges doing the research. But what's happening is you're starting to see viable use cases. D-Wave in BC was an early adopter of this approach, and their quantum annealers perform really well on optimization problems. And they've got all sorts of examples of that happening now. So what QAI did last year is we created a quantum ecosystem report for Canada for 2023. And Canada is not a big country population-wise, but we punch well above our weight in terms of quantum talent, and our education system is good. So what we're finding is a lot of the people who had been working in quantum in labs have migrated into business, and they've got startups. Basically, our CEO said the other week that anybody who's done quantum research probably owns a startup too, because they're seeing this transition from pure research into a use case that could actually make money. If you think about digital computers in the early 1970s, when Intel was designing the 4004 chip, we're at that point just before Intel went to market. And whoever the first Intel is in quantum systems, and that's still up for grabs, we're in that transitional moment right now. And in the next 10 years, you will see a lot of quantum startups, erupt, because the use cases will come on more and more. And like Louise said, this will not be, we just do quantum. It'll be a hybrid solution that leverages the best of classical computing using electronics and quantum systems. So the quantum AI thing, I'm usually pretty good at guessing what the future is going to look like, because I can see how technology is evolving. But when it comes to quantum AI, I suddenly see just a big dark patch. And the reason why, and I've been an AI, I don't know, aficionado for many years, but one of the reasons I'm excited about this, because I think quantum AI will be real AI. This will not be large language modules playing smart statistical tricks to look smart, which is what we have now. This will be genuine artificial intelligence. quantum systems in hybrid are collecting more data than a normal computer can use and crunching it and producing outputs we don't understand that are still correct. That's a really fascinating future. And that could be 15, 20 years out. So I hope to see it before I kick off. You want to jump in on this, Louise?
Yeah, sure. So if you're looking for more quantum training, so QAI is going to be offering a one-day quantum computing for cyber professionals intro course in partnership with Field Effect. Field Effect has created this incredible cyber range where it simulates quantum computers breaking RSA encryption in real time. So it gives you kind of something tangible to lock onto of seeing things happen, because when you hear a lot of words or see a lot of numbers, it's pretty hard to kind of visualize it. So we've been working on making something visual for so you can actually see how these things work and how they could be very impactful in the future. And also all of this training is entirely web-based, so you don't have to have a super fancy computer in order to run it. It just runs on like Chrome or something like that, whatever web browser you want. So stay tuned for more details on this workshop later, and you can subscribe to our newsletter as well, the Quantum Algorithms Institute newsletter, if you want to hear more information.
Yep, that's a cloud-based cyber range using virtual machines. So if you know your cyber training tools, that's what they use. And Field Effect is used by the Canadian government, among other people. So very, very good company to work with. So here's the link to the presentation. So again, if you want to go back over this because you're thinking, wow, Louise and Tim, you just buried me alive in information. If you follow that QR code, it will take you back to a copy of the presentation and you can chase the links and enjoy a really great video on Fourier transforms. So Juan, that's the presentation. What did you think of the updated version?
Okay, Tim, it's very interesting because you have the chance to update information. And it's great that you present these trainings that the Quantum Institute developed. So it could be a good chance that the engineers or another kind of professional in Mexico, it could have the opportunity to travel to Canada, to travel to the Quantum Institute, and to be a part of this project at the institution. So it's very, very awesome because right now, we're in Latin America are develop or cybersecurity policies. For example, that are some important steps. In Chile, Chile created his national cybersecurity law in the last December. And for example, Brazil created his national cybersecurity agency. That it's an important step. But for example, when we are related or we talk about another emerging technologies, some cases of IoT, or for example, some cases of 5G networks, or in the case, for example, of artificial intelligence, AI, we believe that it's so very far from us. So, in the case of quantum technology, I just see your map, and I realize that only Canada has this strategy outlook to think about the development of quantum technology for the development and the national security of this country. So in this case, there are some questions that I want to maybe you can discuss and share with the public of this webinar. For example, what happened? Think about this very particular case of cyber incident named data breach. For example, the data breach is this case that there extracts, for example, maybe 5 terabytes of information, or I don't know, maybe it could be related with some hacktivist groups, for example, WikiLeaks, or the case, for example, in Latin America, Guacamaya, and there is our information that it couldn't be analyzed for common people like us. We don't have the time. The opportunity for understand all the information that stay in this case of a data breach. But what happened if cyber criminals of this group of activists have access to quantum technology, to have the chance to make more analysis, systematization of the information? As for example, think about of the impacts of this kind of data breach. For example, WikiLeaks were very famous related of the impacts that on the problem that causes in the foreign policy between the United States and other countries, we realize that Washington, D.C. spy Angela Merkel, spy Nicolas Sarkozy, and it's very, very worried about because there are more important allies in the Western Occident world. But how impact, for example, what it could have, for example, it's cyber criminal access to quantum technology. I think about cases in the financial cybersecurity issues, for example, in the case of Equifax. For example, this, I don't remember, but it could be 150 millions of register of US citizens. For example, if you have quantum technology, I suppose that it could be very dangerous because cyber criminals, it could have the opportunity to access maybe of all these credit card accounts. So, Luis, please.
My first thought when we were designing the cyber range activity, we thought, well, who would have access to a quantum computer? So our initial idea was it would probably be a nation state. And it would be a powerful nation state that had the funding to put it together. But different nation states have different approaches to cybersecurity. And I think a lot of people focus on the defensive side of things. But I personally think Russia's way of hiring cyber criminal gangs to work for the government is very crafty. So what if the Russian government had access to a quantum computer and they gave a decryption tool to all of the cyber criminals that they've got working? If you wanted to destabilize a country and you had the resources, it might be possible to breach data and collect personal information on every citizen in the country and then use that to financially cripple the country. Things would work on such a strange scale. Imagine if you had to log on to the internet and somebody said to you, whenever you logged on the internet, we cannot guarantee your encryption. We cannot guarantee the safety of your data. Do you still want to do online banking? And then you've got to make a decision. Do I do this or don't I? Or like Luis said, what if we've got a quantum internet that is separate, but you have to pay extra to use that so that you have something that is absolutely secure. But maybe the regular internet where you're doing Instagram is no longer secure in the future. That divide is the interesting part here. The only other thing I would think about was if there is a quantum computer, it'll probably be cloud-based in terms of access. So if that's the case, there's no reason why people couldn't hire access to the quantum computer when it's up and running. And who's to say that people hiring access have the best intentions? They could be criminals. They could be espionage experts looking to break down a government. Imagine if every government website in the country suddenly stopped working all at once, and what kind of panic that would cause. Imagine if every bank in a targeted country suddenly lost control of its internet infrastructure. When you crack encryption on a scale like that, these things are possible. So it does become, I think, like you said, Juan, I think it becomes a national defense priority. It has to be something that from a national defense angle, you need to approach and say, okay, how do we bring everybody in and protect them behind this quantum wall? Louise, what do you think?
Yeah, I think especially quantum attacks, if they happen, I imagine they would only be on massive scales because quantum computers are so hard to access and so few and far between. People who want to use them for bad things are going to really use them. Like they're going to use them in big ways rather than small ways because it's so scarce. So yeah, I definitely think goodness, that's a loud car. I definitely think the nation state thing is a much more realistic option for something that could happen, because if they're gonna make it happen, it's got to be good. I think.
Yeah, it has a big impact. Yeah.
So, Tim expressed something very interesting for this. I understand that quantum policy, it could be a priority of, for example, Western nations that have a good development of high tech or emerging technologies. So in this situation, it could be a little difficult to have some ransomware gangs, cyber criminal gangs in the close time access to this kind of technology. But what happened, for example, with this classification of Mandian of the advanced persistent threats that is denominated as the cases, for example, of cyber commands that are promoted for different governments, for example, the cases of Russia, the cases of China, the cases, for example, of North Korea. And in this situation, for example, what happened if, for example, the cyber operations of Russia that have target a government institution of United States or another Western nation access to quantum algorithms to complement his cyber attacks related with quantum technologies to have more impact in their goals. Or for example, what happens, for example, when we analyze the profile of the APTs of China, it's related of the death of intellectual property, for example, and it's the target of this kind of cyber commands, for example, are Google, Samsung, Apple, another kind of important firms related with development of high-tech technology. But what happened if, for example, in the same case, China used quantum algorithms, quantum technology to have more tools to achieve her goals? It could be a problem because there are APTs or maybe cyber commands that are supported by these kind of governments.
Yeah, if anybody reads Wired, I'm a big Wired fan, the magazine, and they came out with a story, a fictional story, a couple of years ago, and it's written by an admiral from the U.S. Navy, and he's taught, and I think it's based in 2034, so it's about 10 years from now. And in that story, China decides to invade Taiwan. And in the process of doing that, the reason why they decided then to do it was because they had quantum advantage. So what essentially happened is the US forces went in to defend Taiwan, and the Chinese cyber military, which is very advanced, was able to completely shut down all communications. And in some cases, this grounded airplanes or stopped ships from moving because a lot of them depend on networked GPS and navigation systems. So it paralyzed the military. So there's one way to look at this. If you get into a fight, into a war, if one side has good communication and they're safe and secure, that gives them such a huge advantage over the other side. The basically, why wouldn't you go to war? You're going to win. Because you've got this big advantage. And that's basically what the story in Wired was about. I think it's called 2034. And in the story, the US military, even though it was much bigger, was completely helpless because it didn't have quantum advantage. It wasn't secure. Meanwhile, the Chinese military was able to communicate and operate normally. You don't realize how much information drives business, but also military operations and government services, everything really depends on ICT infrastructure. So we've come to rest on RSA and these kind of encryption standards to protect us, and they're very good. There's no reason why RSA shouldn't have lasted much longer, except quantum computers are so new and so different. If this does come to be, if Australia has one in 2028, how long do you think it'll be before somebody copies it? And that's the other thing. The minute one person has it, it'll be like nuclear proliferation. The minute somebody has a nuclear bomb, other countries will develop it because they know it's possible. Yeah. So it's I think the geopolitical context is really interesting because this, like I said at the beginning, quantum is a horizontal technology. It's going to change so many things. I don't know that we'll recognize the world in 2040 because it will have changed so many of the foundational things that we assumed would never change. What do you think, Louise?
Yeah, I think we are all so reliant on technology that is incredibly brittle. Imagine whenever the internet goes down in your house, how lost you feel. Imagine that on a nationwide scale. So it's not just, oh, you can't access Instagram or whatever. its healthcare services are down because none of their systems work. Its supply chains can't work anymore. Factories don't work anymore because everything relies on network connection now. And if that network connection goes down at a nation scale, what do we do? Well, it would be nice to just say, oh, we can just all use pen and paper again. But we've become so impossibly reliant on this technology that could fail, that it could be very bad, essentially.
Okay. No, that's really interesting. And when Tim present the example of Taiwan, I related immediately to for the case of Enigma, that cryptography machine that is very useful in the Second World War. So I believe that right now, quantum technology it could be this war advantage in the wars in the 21st century, or the conflicts in the 21st century related to analyze information, to take some intelligent actions, and to define different conflicts or different geopolitical conflicts around the world. So that's very interesting. And I have only the last question related with your map. There is a index related with the reference center of the Harvard University named National Cyber Power Index. For example, it's very interesting because this document presents the 5 powers of the cybersecurity around the world related with capabilities, with the case of the advantage that they have in all the world. They're defined that these 5 powers in cybersecurity issues are United States, like the case of United Kingdom, Russia, China, and Israel. Do you believe, do you know some study, or what do you believe that are the powers related of quantum technology, or the most important nations that define the geopolitical issues related with this quantum technology in the near future?
So I was in the Horizons EU funding call, and all the people in Europe were very worried because of the way the United States, I don't want to say steals, but takes their top scientific talent the minute it becomes viable. So the EU is very frustrated that they would train all of these people, have them come up through school, develop expertise, become very good at what they do, and then a US company would come over and just pluck them out and give them more money. So I think you have to, if you underestimate the United States' ability to collect talent, I think that's dangerous because they're very good at it. And I think Mexico and Canada is very conscious of that because we live next to them. We have what's called a brain drain here, where all of our good brains get drained into the United States. So we train them in Canada, we fund them, we build them up, and then the minute they're very good, the United States takes them. And it probably happens in Mexico too. So yeah, and in the EU. So I think if you had to pick number one, I'd say the United States, because they are very good at collecting the talent needed to do this. We're working on the ecosystem report for 2024 right now, and the biggest shortcoming is talent. People have a background in quantum, a background in advanced cybersecurity and other interdisciplinary fields. Those people are in very short supply all over the world. So if you're able to draw that talent to where you are, I think that is a real superpower. So I think if there is a superpower in quantum, it's the United States. It's a little confusing because when you looked at our map there, it looks like the United States doesn't pay a lot of money, but that's government funding. That doesn't mention what Google is spending on it, what Microsoft is spending on it, what IBM is spending on it. So all of those companies, those private companies aren't counted. And they're putting billions into quantum development as well. And most of them are US based and have a close partnership with the US government. So I think the US has a real advantage. What Russia and China have done have tried to go after other aspects like quantum communication. That's not something that was as high a priority. The United States is going after quantum computing. They really want to own that. So when Australia did that move and put $1 billion into that was a real surprise, because they're trying to draw quantum talent away from the United States to do that. But what China and Russia are doing is very interesting because they're coming at it from another angle. They're looking at and saying, well, what if we can create our own quantum communications network? So again, quantum isn't just quantum computing. There are many different technologies that could be applied. So that's my angle on it. What do you think, Louis?
I'm pretty much in agreement. Yeah, I've actually recently been doing a lot of research on just post quantum cryptography, quantum networking, things like that. I've just been looking at research papers from like the last 10 years within these areas to try and kind of do a bit of a demographics review, see who's doing what. And I definitely see different countries pop up more than others, like lots of European countries for sure, Canada, US. But then it also doesn't account for countries that maybe don't publish what they're doing. They do it, but aren't super open about it. But yeah, I think it is very interesting how different countries have different approaches to quantum, because there's so much to quantum computing other than breaking encryption. Like, although we've been talking a lot about all these dangers of quantum computing, there are incredible things that it can do for pharmaceuticals and optimization and AI, all these different things. So yeah, it's a very interesting, fast evolving space where we can see kind of what the different priorities of different nations might be in terms of where they want to get things with their technology. So I think just keep up to date with all the news, see what's been going on in different countries, because it's very interesting. There's a lot of really good work happening.
Okay, okay. That's interesting because, like Louis said, there is important, or there is a strategic issue. Don't publish your development related to quantum computing, because it could be some secrecy, because it could be an advantage in the near future related that you have the most development or the most important tools in these geopolitical disrupts, or in these geopolitical conflicts. So this it's very, very, very interesting. We have a question related with the exposition. It's from Daniela Martinez Trejo. It said, good afternoon. Thank you for sharing this information with us. I had one question. What impact could quantum cryptography have on data protection in social network? And this is important because when I read this question, I, for example, think about these important cases, for example, data breach on Yahoo, or for example, the case of Cambridge Analytica, of this extraction of information of the profiles of US citizens. Quantum technology, it could support the social network to prevent these kinds of data breach, and it promote more safety internet environment related with data protection.
Yeah, there's another algorithm called Grover's algorithm, which is designed to search large databases very quickly. And Grover's algorithm also, I think, has use cases in cybersecurity. Because if you're looking for anomalies in how data is being used, something like this would be really good at picking out anomalies. So yeah, in a defensive way, I think there's another use case with the Grover search algorithm that could be used as a defensive tool. So you've got a quantum computer that's overseeing a really large data set, like a social social networking site, which has so much data in it, a massive amount of data. But a quantum computer could actually sort through that much more quickly and look for problems. Can you think of any other use cases, Louise?
Specific to like data?
Well, and just personal data and social media, like that end of things. Because it's easy to talk about the military and everything, but
Okay.
I think this could affect individuals too.
I think apart from use cases, I think it's very interesting to think about the social, like kind of sociological view that quantum computing is going to put on people, with maybe what they put online, what they don't put online. Something that has been crossing my mind a lot recently is that how much of our era of time, like the past 20 years or so, is going to be kept if data centers fail. Like if all of our data on the internet just goes poof, or it all gets breached by, for example, quantum computing, what's going to happen? Everything we've written down is gone, you know? So I think this looming threat of having your data, like even with harvest now, decrypt later, if that is a thing that's actually happening, all this data we put online for ourselves is so volatile. that I think is going to really change, like if this becomes more of a more widely talked about issue, which it should be already, of data security, especially with quantum computing. I think it's going to change how we think about what we put online. That's such a cliche line to say, think about what you put online. But I think if people start to see this happening, they're really going to think about where their priorities lie with what goes online. You know, all of our money is online, and we put everything in our whole lives there. So it's a very interesting sociological case, I think.
The ephemeral nature of it is interesting too. My favorite director, Guillermo del Toro, was talking the other week about how every movie and TV show made in the last 10 years has no physical copy.
Yeah.
So if we had a massive data failure, anything that was made in the entertainment industry in the last 10 years would vanish, like it never happened.
And that's scary.
Well, there was always, like, you always had a DVD or something, right? You had a physical backup of a film or a TV show or something, and none of that is. And he's really concerned about that because he's saying, I've made all of this art, and the art isn't like the David or something. It's not like a statue. It's this ephemeral data that could just evaporate if we lose our grip on all of this infrastructure.
Okay. That's really nice, because when Luis bought this scenario related with the data centers fail, for example, and I know that Canada have a lot of important literature tradition related with sci-fi authors, for example, Ursula K. Le Guin or Margaret Atwood, that are very famous right now. I believe in this kind of scenario. For example, ransomware is one of the most growing important cyber attacks that are happening right now. For example, we believe in a dystopic scenario. For example, we believe in the ransomware that it could be encrypt the information of the complete data centers, and data centers that are data centers important for different in countries like US or, for example, European Union. That it could be a very good unsolved problem, and maybe quantum technology, it could solve this. For example, quantum technology, it could be a good alternative to this, for example, important growing that have ransomware in the actually or right now, and for example, the ransomware linking in the cyber attacks to government institutions.
And they encrypt that data, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if you had a cybersecurity solution that used a quantum computer to decrypt the ransomware, and you got all your data back? So yeah, I'm curious. I don't know offhand, but does anyone know what kind of encryption ransomware uses typically to encrypt data? Because there are certain encryption standards that would be really difficult to break even with a quantum computer. I'm thinking AES, Louise. So if someone's using a symmetrical encryption system to lock down data in a ransomware attack, that a quantum computer probably wouldn't help you very much. But if they are using a hackable encryption standard, yeah, you could use a quantum computer to solve your ransomware problem. That would be very satisfying, actually. I would love to see that happen.
Okay. You want to add something, Luis, or what you your?
No, that's all good stuff.
I've never even thought of it before, but I was thinking about it as one was talking there. I think that's a really interesting use case. But I don't know what they encrypt it with in ransomware. So it would be how they encrypt the data. I imagine it's fairly poorly. I don't imagine people doing ransomware use great encryption or
Sometimes
anything. They probably use really poor encryption.
Yeah, sometimes it's entirely social. They won't actually encrypt anything, and they'll just make you think, like all those pop-ups saying you have 25,000 viruses, those kind of things. Yeah. A lot of it is just fake. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a last question that I received through a WhatsApp. And it's related with for example, the great quantity of data that needs the tools related of generative AI. For example, let's say we are close to the time that normal computers doesn't have the capabilities to analyze this great quantity and information, it could be a strategy they use for quantum technology?
What do you think, Louise?
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned before, quantum computers are very good at optimizing things. That's kind of one of the main big use cases they have. So yeah, it is kind of scary to think that, especially with generative AI and stuff, we now have so much data that we cannot possibly look through it all. So I think with the combo of AI and quantum computing working in tandem, there could be a lot of different use cases for that of sifting through data or even archiving it. Not too sure, but yeah, that is a very interesting question about we have so much data that we don't know what to do with, and I do think that the combination of those two technologies could help us out.
I think the more interesting part with quantum use in AI is its ability to make deeper connections. I went on a Midjourney training course, so I've been working with Midjourney to understand how the generative AI works. And sometimes when you're walking through it, making a picture, you realize that it has no idea what it's doing. It'll suddenly produce somebody with like 2 arms out of one side or something, because it doesn't actually understand what it is. It doesn't have context. What it's doing is developing a picture that looks enough like the other pictures it's got in its database that it looks like it could be a real picture. But so you can see that failure. For me, what's interesting is a quantum computer could sort through so much more data. I think how it feeds the training system for the AI will make for smarter AI systems, because the training will become better with quantum assistance. And then on the other side, when you've got the AI trained and operating, if the AI can then reach out and use a quantum computer when it needs it, like Louise said, for those use cases where a quantum computer would be ideal, like if you're doing optimization problems or things like that, then that enhances the AI in 2 ways. So the quantum computer could make a smarter training process, but it could also, at the end of it, be a resource that the AI could use.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you, Tim. I suppose that maybe, for example, when I start to publish these topics related with cybersecurity in 2019, it was very sexy to be a cybersecurity expert. But with the years, it were lower sexes. So right now, for example, I read some literature that we are talking about emerging technologies and emerging technology that have some penetration, for example, about cybersecurity. It's related, for example, with 5G networks, and it's related with IoT, and this is related with the great quantity of data that generates with this kind of different instruments. And for example, it will be necessary AA, because AA have the possibility to analyze the great quantity of data with some application maybe of deep learning, machine learning, but the traditional computing doesn't have the chance or the capabilities to do, and it's important the quantum technology. So it will be like a compenetration, a relation with all these emerging technology that's very fascinating, very interesting, because I told you at the beginning of this webinar, this is like a futurist or say fiction issues in Latin America for us. Talk about quantum, it's very, very close. We don't have, or we don't decide, for example, in the case of Mexico, some important strategic actions or steps related with develop our national cybersecurity policy. So for this reason, it will be a pleasure to have you here, to have you here, Luis. It's very, very honor for me and the North America Research Center, the CISAN, to have the possibility, the chance to have this webinar, this talk, and it will be awesome your exposition, because I believe that it could be a precedent for to create more interest in this kind of topics, create more interest in quantum computing issues in Latin America. So I'm very grateful with you.
Thanks for inviting us. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. I wish we should do a weekly webinar where we just come on and talk to each other.
Just talk, yeah.
Yes, just let's talk. So it will be a pleasure for all the people that assist to this webinar. So thank you very much. So I hope you have the chance to talk about these quantum technologies very close. So it will be a pleasure for the North American Research. Thank you, team. Thank you, Luis. And it will be awesome, your exposition. Thank you, thank you. Ay, Esme, ya terminamos. ¿Me escucha, Esme?
Sí, doctor. Ya estamos fuera,
Ah,
¿eh?